So this week on Cooldown, we're going to talk about traveling and training. And this is an area where both Tyler and I have some experience, although Tyler more on the athletic side. But I traveled in a lot during my business career as a consultant especially, but even as a technology leader, I traveled a lot. So we both have probably some insights here, and we're going to talk about a little bit, both in terms of training and getting along during travel in general. So, Tyler, you mentioned you're in Europe right now as part of Project Himalaya, and you've done an enormous amount of traveling. I certainly know because every time we talk to you, you're some different place on the globe, and they tend to be far apart places like Quito and Nepal and Kilimanjaro and Japan and just all over the place. Um, so, let's talk a little bit about how you maintain your training and your work level when you are traveling this much. So, I mean, we can take this trip as an example. You went from the summit of Cotopaxi right basically to a red eye to Europe with hardly a moment to spare. How do you balance training, recovery, and travel when you're doing things like that?
I think it's flexibility and patience are really important. I mean, literally yesterday, I was at 7 a.m. I was on top of Cotopaxi, and at 7 p.m. I was on a flight. And first of all, I would not recommend that. That's really not a great way to do things. And when uh when Connor and I were actually planning that trip, we were like, we definitely shouldn't still be in the park on Friday morning because it's like, what if something goes wrong? It's cutting it way too close with our travel, and then surprise, there we were. But yeah, sometimes that's just how it goes, and you usually get away with it. But no, don't do that in general. I think that people drastically undervalue the recovery side that comes with travel and the kind of flexibility that's needed with that. So this is why when I'm in keto, for example, I can really get into my monk mode and my training looks super consistent. And it's part of why one of the things that I wrote on that list of 16 things that I was going to hold myself accountable for at the beginning of this season, one of them was minimize outside travel and stress, basically, because I know that when I'm traveling, my training will not be as consistent because you can force it and make it happen, but I think at the end of the day, it's often detrimental. It's more important to focus on making sure you're getting something in, but at the same time balancing that with recovery. Like, traveling is really tiring, regardless of how good of a traveler you are or whether you're flying in first class or economy or whatever. Doesn't matter. It's still like a lot of stress on your body, especially if you're doing time zone changes and getting up early or staying up late or taking red eyes. Like, just wears you out. And it's really easy to be like, oh, well, I've still got time, so I'll just do all my normal training that I would. And I think it's usually a mistake. So I try and give myself a lot more grace on the training side and a lot more flexibility. So when I'm in keto, I might have extremely specific metrics I'm trying to hit, and when I'm traveling, it's more like, okay, just we'll see what we can get in. If we get in 1 hour, it's great. If we get in 3 hours, that's great. But we're going to be flexible and see what we have time for.
Yep, I think that's good advice. I do think if there's any one thing I would say, it's people just dramatically underestimate the effect of travel on your mind and your body. It takes a lot out of you, and it's gotten mostly worse over the years because more people are traveling. Airlines are getting tougher on perks and everything else, and security just gets tighter and tighter all the
Yeah.
time. So the combination is it just generally takes longer to do everything. There's more stress involved, and it takes something out of you. So you really have to take that into account. I think the other thing I always think about is think about overall productivity rather than productivity on the day you're traveling. And so, so when I was in business, everybody would, prove their toughness by taking the red eye. I live in the East Coast of the United States. A lot of the tech stuff was happening on the West Coast of the United States, and everybody would take the red eye back from the West Coast to the East Coast, because you effectively save an entire business day because it's a long trip. You're going against the time zone. So you lose a whole day if you don't take the red eye. But the reality is I stopped taking red eyes pretty early because what you discover pretty quickly is, yeah, you get back there, but you're useless for a day and a half because you're completely exhausted.
Yeah.
And well, it's a little bit different now, but not that much. When I first started traveling, there were no lie flat seats. So you just could not. And I'm a really good sleeper. I mean, I can sleep on planes 2 minutes after I get on them, even in a regular seat. But it's not the same kind of sleep. And it's a 5-hour flight. So you just can't get that much sleep.
Yeah, it's like the worst length
So
flight for
I
a
think
red eye.
it's better to take the bigger picture and say, okay, I'm better off taking a day flight and taking the extra day. I'm better off, to your point, doing a little less training and not pushing it quite so hard because I'm going to be more competent, both mentally and physically overall.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's wise words. What do you find the most challenging? What's the hardest thing about travel, and what are the best strategies you have for coping with it?
I think for me, it's balancing sleep. I think I really tremendously value sleep as an athlete and as a human being. Like I get really cranky. I know you and my brother both function on a lot less sleep, which I'm super jealous of. But I do not function well on not a lot of sleep, and that for me has always been the hardest thing. And so one of the things that I do is I actually exactly what you were just talking about. I almost never book like short red eyes. Like I will pay more money to fly during the day. And it used to be the exact opposite. It used to be what you're saying, where I was like, oh, it's a waste of a day or something. But I would rather now, like Quito is a really good example because the flights out of Quito are usually really short red eyes, like flying across the States. They're like 4 or 5 hour red eyes, or they're 4 or 5 hour flights during the day, and then you kind of lose a whole day. But I would rather nowadays like get up at literally 3 o'clock in the morning and do an hour of training before I leave, and then just fly all day. And like I can doze a little bit. I can get some work done on those planes. I don't see it as a lost day at all. I guess that's one of the strategies I've developed is really like recognizing what am I going to do with this time on an airplane. I find that airplanes are a great time to do things like writing, reading, but like important reading. If there's Wi-Fi, like focused work, that kind of thing, because there's just nothing else to do. There's no distraction. There's nowhere else to go. You're stuck there for a few hours. And I actually really enjoy that. I sometimes have really productive writing sessions or other work sessions on airplanes, and going into the flight knowing what am I going to do on this flight? Am I going to sleep, or am I going to work, or am I going to, drink free champagne and watch dumb movies? Like, but knowing that ahead of time and having that planned, like that's kind of how I think about my strategy for air travel is, last night I had a red eye, and when I have a red eye, I literally will I will board as soon as possible, and I will take some sleepy time stuff, some melatonin, some whatever. I'll take like NyQuil sometimes for a long flight, and I will just close my eyes and lie down as soon as I get on the plane. And they'll like, oh, we're taking off. You got to put your seat straight up or whatever. Okay. And then as soon as we're up in the air, I'm horizontal the whole flight if I can be, so that to me is so important of just taking advantage of every second of that. And then the same thing, if I'm going to work, it's like, okay, if I'm going to work, I'm going to have a bunch of coffee. I'm going to caffeinate myself. I'm going to be really focused. And I'm going to have a to-do list, and I'm going to work through my to-do list. And so that way it doesn't feel like the flight is a waste of time. It's not like I'm sitting there bored watching stupid TV shows. Like I have time for that when I'm on the stationary bike. When I'm on the plane, I'm actually trying to do something productive, whether that's working or resting. And it's pretty much going to be one of those two.
Yep. Yes. Well, Cal Newport would be proud. For those who are interested, you can Google Cal Newport, who wrote a thing called Deep Work. And I agree 100%. A little planning, because it is great. The one thing about a plane, and actually, of course, used to be much more so this way than it is now because there was no Wi-Fi on planes. So when you got onto that plane, you were isolated from the world for that period. You were totally isolated. You could do whatever you want. And so I found it some of the most productive work time very consistently. But you have to plan a little bit, make sure you've got the work you want or the book you want to read or whatever it is. But you really can get some serious focused work done, especially if the flight is longer than a couple of hours. And I found that quite productive. And it's, again, a testimony to the fact that we're so distracted all the time that it really hurts when you notice, oh, my productivity was so high because I was stuck on this plane for 5 hours. It's like, well, maybe you should like treat yourself to getting stuck on the plane more often, even when you're down in your home office or your work office, and just sort of pretend you're on an airplane, close that door, turn off the Wi-Fi, and get some work done. Okay. Are there specific tools? So if we get tactical, what specific tools, gear, processes, anything that you've got as pro tips to make it easier for the traveler who hasn't had as much experience as you?
Yeah, let me answer that, and then I'll kick it back to you because I'm curious to hear your answer as well. And let me divide that into two. We'll talk about gear, and then I'll talk about kind of general tips. So gear wise, I would say two things. One is any kind of like sub container, like packing cubes or stuff sacks or things that you can kind of use to organize your stuff, so that instead of just having like a suitcase full of clothes, you have a suitcase full of bags of clothes. Like, to me, that's really, really helpful. You know, for this trip, I'm going to be in a few different climates. Some of them are really cold. So I have like my whole cold weather bag, and I know like I'm in Spain today, I don't need to touch that, and I can just leave it, you know, and then it's like, oh, this is my, like, when I arrive and I want to work out, here's that stuff already in its own little thing. So that's one thing, is just having things in their own little containers inside your suitcase can be really helpful, especially for kind of short trips like this. The other thing that I've found that I kind of just discovered this like in the last year is, so I have like a little tiny drawstring bag, not that tiny. It's I mean, it's big enough to hold my laptop. But what I do with that is I actually put the stuff that I'm going to use on the airplane in that bag. And then I put that bag in my like actual carry-on backpack. So I have, you know, like a bigger backpack that I wear as my carry-on. And then I put this drawstring bag in there so that when I get on the airplane, all I have to do is take out that drawstring bag, and I know it has everything I want for the flight. So, you know, last night I'm basically going to bed. So it's got, you know, my earplugs bag, it's got my toiletry kit. Maybe it's got like an extra layer or something. But if I'm going to be working, okay, it'll have my laptop, it'll have my notebook, it'll have my phone charger, my headphones, you know, all those things. And those will be in there so that I don't have to worry about like digging through my backpack and finding, oh, where is my cell phone charger? Where is my like earbuds case, whatever it is. All that is in this one contained thing. And then I can just stow my backpack away and not have to worry about it during the flight. And so that I found to be really, really helpful as just like ways to keep your stuff kind of organized. And then in terms of overall pro tips, one thing is just staying hydrated is so important when you're flying. Like, it's kind of a cliche, but it's totally true. And I try to do this through both food and liquid. So obviously just drinking a lot of water, whatever it is that you like to drink, not alcohol ideally, because that dehydrates you, but just drinking a lot, but also eating really water dense foods. So like fruits and salads and things like that. I try to do that as much as possible when I'm flying, because you just get so dehydrated on airplanes, especially on really long flights. So that's kind of my pro tip on that side. Oh, and the other thing, this is the last thing I'll say is, this is very runner specific, but you can always tie you can always tie a pair of shoes to your bag. That they almost never give you a hard time about that. And like this trip in particular, I was trying to not check a bag. And so if you're tight on space and you have like your running shoes, just like tie them to the outside of your bag. And then you have a bonus, which is if you have to like gate check your other carry-on, or if your shoes are in your checked bag and God forbid they don't make it. This just happened to Connor last week. And then you don't have to go to the mall at 9 o'clock in the morning on your first day and buy a new pair of running shoes to run in and thing. So like you always have your stuff. So yeah, that's a good one. You can always tie your shoes to the outside of your backpack. And then everyone knows you're a super cool runner guy too, because you have shoes dangling from your backpack.
Yeah. Had a friend who even used to put his roller, like a sleeping bag, on his backpack so he didn't have to pack his roller, because they're
Nice.
big, they're kind of bulky, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's great.
What have you got?
I would say,
what are your tips and tricks? You've been doing this way longer
well,
than me.
they're a little different, but I think I would certainly say on the plane itself, number one is hydration. Try to avoid the alcohol and, drink the water. And if it makes you go to the bathroom, don't worry, just get up and go to the bathroom. Okay. It's worth it, because what most people really actually don't even realize is most planes are only pressurized to about 8 to 10,000 feet.
Yep.
So you're literally like being in keto. You're in a very hypoxic environment, a very dry environment. And so, skin lotion, I always have skin lotion for my hands, and drinking is number one, absolute number one thing. And you will generally feel better. Here's another thing that I picked up a while back. Take an old sock, put 2 tennis balls about 4 inches apart in the sock, and then use that on your kidneys. Put it basically right on your kidneys when you sit down.
Like on your back?
Yeah. On your back, in between you and the chair, for lumbar support. And it has made an enormous amount of difference for me, even on shorter flights, but especially on longer flights. And a corollary of that is try and force yourself every hour to get off and do at least a little bit of walking around. Again, deep vein thrombosis, which is where you get a clot in an extremity like a leg, most typically, is a real danger, even if you're in perfect health. Serena Williams, right? Best woman tennis player in history, probably had a deep vein thrombosis. And flying really makes you more susceptible to them. So try to get some movement in, and it's not only helpful for preventing that catastrophe, but it's also helpful in general. If you're trying to work, whatever you're trying to do, you're going to feel a lot better. If you're sleeping, okay, sleep. You don't wake yourself up every hour. The sleep is more important. And I would say maximizing sleep in general, absolutely sleep. And yes, I used to live on a little sleep, but actually I sleep a lot now, all the time, because the research is overwhelming now that sleep is medicine, maybe some of the best medicine you can get. And so getting good sleep, if you're going to be on a red eye, trying to get the maximum amount of sleep is the best, or just avoid the red eyes and get better sleep when you're on the ground. But in terms of tips for getting on the plane, definitely hydration. The tennis balls are great for not having your body feel terrible. Get up and walk every 30 minutes to an hour, at least once an hour. Try and move. Even if you're really uncomfortable, just even stretching your arms and your legs in the seat will help. And if you're crazy about your steps, you can put your watch on your toe, and you can even get steps while you're not moving around. A David Sedaris tip.
That's definitely cheating.
I don't do that because I don't really care that much. But it was David Sedaris, who is a funny writer and obsessed with steps, wrote about that one time. Anyway, and then in terms of getting on the plane, packing tubes are great, not only for organization, but the better ones are good compression packs. And compression is good because if I have one other tip, it would be try not to check a bag, because it makes your life just that much more tiring and complicated. Don't go crazy, but I used to go for 2-week trips to Europe and not check a bag. But to do that, especially if you're in business, you got to get a lot in that bag. And a lot of the way I would do it was to use these stuffed sacks or whatever to compress everything down. The theory was supposed to keep your clothes less wrinkled. I'm not so sure about that part, but it definitely helped you get more into the rollerboard without stressing so much, and use something with wheels. I still see so many people, and I think you might be one of them, Mr. Tyler, young men especially, who walk around with big heavy backpacks and duffel bags. It's like, get yourself a rollerboard.
What are you talking about?
That's true. You do have a rollerboard. But I see so many people get on planes with just, carry sacks, and they got to get pretty heavy if you start putting a lot of stuff in there. It's just not healthy. So get yourself a wheeled piece of luggage, and you'll thank yourself for it. And then the last thing I would say, because they've gotten so much more restrictive on what you can take on now, at least in the United States, you're only allowed to have 2 bags. Yeah, as you said, you find little tricks like, I can put a I can tie a pair of sneakers on the outside, or I can tie, a lot of people tie headrests, those little, neck
Hmm.
pillows on the outside. Um, I will tell you the number one thing for me, the nerdiest thing for me is get yourself a multi-pocketed parka or vest or something like that. I use Scotty vests. I don't get paid by them or anything, and there are a number of brands that do this, but they have like a million really strong pockets in them. And it's like having literally another bag. I mean, you can get so much stuff in them.
It's so
And
outrageous how much you can put in those things.
you can literally put a laptop in some of them. Um, and it helps, because it's, it's a bureaucracy and they're just not going to bend to the rules. And so you're going to get, it didn't used to be this way. So for me, it was a real adjustment because you used to be able to take pretty much anything you wanted on board. And then all of a sudden it was like, if you came on with like one little extra teeny thing, it was like, nope, that's got to go in one of those bags. And so for me, the Scotty vest was the answer because you bet.
The other
And
thing
here's
that
one more tip: they
yeah, go
never
ahead.
challenge food bags, which is
That's what
weird.
I was gonna say. Like for some reason, if you have a food bag, it doesn't count. Like so you could
Yeah.
have just like a Starbucks bag or like a McDonald's bag. It's like a
Yep.
paper bag, and it could be
Yep.
full of your stuff, but no
I
one's ever
I
gonna
used to do it
check,
all the
and you can just
time,
walk on with that.
all the time, because another pro tip, at least for me, I'm a type 1 diabetic. And so my diet, I mean, everybody's diet, again, should be of some concern to them because, again, like sleep, diet and sleep, probably the two most important things. Diet, sleep, exercise, those are the big three. And, food service on planes, you're not going to know what it is, right? You have no idea what the actual macronutrient content is. So I tend to just take my own food. And that's what leads to this. So you can go into the airport, and if you have a food that you like, and you can get it there, a salad or fish or whatever, I would buy it before I got on the plane. And that also gives you, now you have another bag, right? You can put whatever you want in that
Yep.
bag.
Of course, the simplest
So it is a
solution to
little,
all this
those are,
bag stuff is just bring less stuff. You don't need that much stuff. Like, yes, obviously,
well,
if you have
that
like
is another,
sports equipment and medical equipment and like whatever it is, like that stuff does take up space. But that's like the first principles issue here is just bring less stuff.
that is true. The first thing is bring the minimal amount of stuff.
Yep.
I have some challenges, both because I like things. I like to have my things with me. So part of it is I'm just narcissistic that way. But I also have to carry a lot of extra stuff because I'm a type 1 diabetic.
Yep.
I always have
Which
to
is
have
fair.
all the medical equipment with me. And
Yep.
so that it does take up, it's a little bulky. So that's my excuse and I'm sticking with it.
Fair.
But yes, I'm not great at being a minimalist, and it does help if you can be a minimalist. Um, okay. Anyway, so let's go on. So finally, so now you're sort of a nomad. We're sort of your warehouse here, where you keep some stuff. But other than that, you spend more time in keto clearly than anywhere else, but not that much more. And so, how do you feel about it at this point? So, do you still like running around the world all the time, or would you rather that you had a little less airplane miles in your future?
I really enjoy being able to go to a lot of different places. I still love that. I think for me, the thing that's the hardest has been not having like your house is probably the closest thing I have to a home base. And like you said, it's like a warehouse where I come back there and can rearrange my stuff and then go somewhere else. I think having a home, like a place in Quito, for example, which I kind of have now, that feels, having places that feel like home where I can then branch out and go to other places, that seems a lot more enjoyable than the last 3 or 4 years where it's literally just been like point A, point B, point C, point D, point E, point F, and then every once in a while I'd pop back to your house because I need to get new shoes or something, and then see you guys obviously. But yeah, I think to me that's the most exhausting thing is when it's like every week you're packing up and going somewhere else, and you have to literally pack up every single thing that you have with you, and especially if you're doing air travel and go through airports and stuff, like that's the thing that I really am not crazy about. Or even like little trips like this where it's a lot of travel for a very short amount of time in a place, like that's not my favorite thing. But I think still the idea of being in a bunch of different places, seeing different parts of the world, having literally different communities where I feel I have people that I love and know and trust there, that is really special. That I can come to Massachusetts and I have you guys and other family and Connor, and then I can come to Quito and I have, Greg and the brewery guys and my other friends in Quito, and I can go to Nepal and I have Dawa and people that I'm starting to get to know there as well. And that feels really special, and I love that. So I wouldn't trade that for anything, but I do think, having a home base and having those places where I'm spending more time and can feel a little bit more settled down, that feels really, really wonderful.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you anytime you want to stop through, and the pictures you send are wonderful. So we enjoy your travels vicariously. Okay. Excellent. Anything else that we've not mentioned that you want to get in for public service?
I think we're good. We've talked a lot about travel. I know this is mostly a running podcast, so we'll leave it there. But if you guys have travel questions, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to nerd about this stuff as well. Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will read us out. That's all for this week. Thanks, everybody. Please, again, like I said at the top of the show, share this episode with your friends and family. Spice up the old group chat. And also, please do the whole like, comment, subscribe. You can do that on YouTube, Substack, whatever podcasting app you use. And yeah, if you love it or hate it, please send us feedback. We would love that. Any questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams, you can send those to me, ty@chosky.run, or DM me, Tyler C. Andrews, on Instagram. Remember, you can also read the full unedited training logs on Substack. That's tylercandrews.substack.com. Or on my blog at tylercandrews.com. Ty's Training is a Chosky Media production and brought to you by Chosky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.
Bye-bye.